Test the claim.
So, what point do you want to kind of talk? You want to talk more about like just the concept of like what Ahura Mazda could be, or what's your perspective? Or
The thing is, whatever I say about it, I'll be treading on someone's toes. So there will be Orthodox Zoroastrians.
yeah, am I in frame? Yeah,
I think so.
just let me know. Yeah.
That's perfect.
Okay, cool. Let's just make sure. Yeah.
Who there will be Orthodox Zoroastrians.
Also, shout out to Loriana. yeah.
There'll be Orthodox Zoroastrians who believe that the explanation for some of these questions are dealt with.
Okay.
But I haven't read or heard anything that satisfies me.
Okay. So what is the classical understanding of what Ahura Mazda is? According to what is that? So we can start there and deviate. It's fine.
So I think we've talked, we've kind of scratched the surface on like religion for. I think history is littered with this idea that there is religion for the layperson,
yeah, of course,
the initiate, and then there's religion for the adept, the person who perhaps is more spiritually versed and therefore able to deal or engage with the more esoteric aspects of any given faith.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting.
So there are other examples in other religions that maybe we can delve into. So in the same way, I think that there is an everyday Zoroastrianism, and then I think there is a deeper understanding.
Okay.
But I think that where the psyche of mankind is now, I don't think it needs to be dumbed down. I think that it can now be
that's interesting.
like the idea, like where mankind has gone with ideas, like let's say in physics, where there are principles now, like in quantum theory, that can be demonstrated to be true, but without the modern processes for analyzing them, no one would ever believe that they were possible.
Of course.
So I think that collectively the human psyche is primed for explanations that have a slightly deeper, maybe less intuitive explanation, which are nevertheless plausibly true.
Yeah, because I think something we spoke about on like privately on many occasions is the humanization of the deity, which is a natural tendency when ancient people, modern people, people in antiquity, people throughout history have considered what divinity is. It's always been in some way, shape or form effectively like a superhuman. Maybe with a different face, like for example the gods of ancient Egypt, they had animalistic faces. But they were ultimately humanoids. They were beings. They wanted kingdoms. They wanted power. They were effectively just extensions of humanity,
but maybe with attributes that made them superhuman, so
exactly.
to speak. Like unusually large stature, for example.
Exactly, larger, maybe more power, creative ability. They were able to do things that the average human weren't able to do, like Zeus throwing thunderbolts, for example. This is an example.
But still, in the minds of the average person, a humanoid for all intents and purposes.
Exactly. So
with human-like desires,
personality, exactly.
Right. So
this is a natural tendency which exists in the psyche of mankind for most of history. We're just calling it the anthropomorphizing or the humanizing of a divine entity.
Or a divine concept.
Or concept. So the idea, for example, of God just being some sort of immaterial energy that has no personality, no sense of I, no awareness in an individualized form, it just is some sort of essence of existence, is not a concept that was really part of ancient religions.
And perhaps because it was almost seen as impossible to relate to.
Of course.
Which is why I kind of prefaced like the start of this conversation with the idea that actually I'd like to think that mankind is in a place now where we can begin to engage with ideas that don't look like us,
No, but
don't feel like us.
yeah, and especially now we have greater perception of what is beyond our physical earth, meaning we can look into the stars and see things that ancient civilizations were never aware of. We know about black holes, we know about a whole series of different kinds of things that just didn't fall into the realm of understanding. So, for example, the idea of God wanting to be worshipped, which is a very strong component in the Abrahamic faith. The entity wishes to be revered and respected and adored by its creation. The idea of some sort of immaterial energy desiring that just wouldn't make sense in the context of it not being a being.
Yeah, and so we were discussing
you see what I mean?
What a being is.
Yeah, like what is a being? What is a being?
As opposed to what is being.
Exactly. What does it mean to exist versus being a being? So the Abrahamic tradition, the God of Abraham is an actual individualized being with a mind, with a will, with a personality, with desires, with feelings, with wishes.
A distinct persona.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It has a personality that can be identified clearly, as you said. And is motivated to reach out to humanity, interact with entities and give it laws. Fantastic. That is a particular conception of what a deity could be. Whereas that idea, you would say, is more on the initiate level.
Yes.
Whereas the deeper truth that concept points to is what we're trying to explore today in terms of how you conceptualize Ahura Mazda. Because when you think of existence, and I know that we will always fail in our ability to think outside of the box because we're currently confined to the universe. There are many different kinds of existences in this universe. Like one thing we said earlier is light itself. Light exists, but the mode of that existence is different from being conscious. It's just energy moving through space.
Which itself is energy.
Which itself is energy. But that light that is traveling is being, but it isn't a being.
Right.
Yet it has particular functions.
It is being in the sense that it exists.
Exactly. And
but
it serves
has
a purpose.
no knowledge of its own existence.
Exactly. Yet it serves a specific purpose.
Right.
Illuminating everything. So when you think of that concept, and then you also think about ideas such as what wisdom is in of itself, would wisdom need to be a conscious agent to be wisdom?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Just to touch on something you said earlier about the deeper understanding beyond the initiate.
Yep.
And I think a part of that is understanding the reasons behind the initiate level of understanding.
Of course, there's purpose for that.
There is a purpose for it. And that is to act as an interface for a deeper understanding or concepts that ultimately have had these anthropomorphized human-like attributes superimposed onto them to make them accessible.
To people, yeah.
So that people can at least begin to relate and understand. But then I think there needs to come a point where we kind of begin to wash that away from the core of what's really underneath that, what I think is a facade of human-like attributes for what I guess we commonly call divine existences.
Yeah. Because if and I find this interesting because the Jews, and I'm using the Jews because they are an authority on some level, would say that the God of Abraham is
certainly
infinite.
an authority on Judaism.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a foundational part of the Abrahamic tradition. Meaning
they believe that God is infinite, meaning he cannot be confined even conceptually. And when they look at verses where God is described anthropomorphically or being like a father, they always say, no, these are just metaphors. These are just, so it feeds into what you're saying. These are the surface level ideas to initiate someone to the concept of what a divine entity is. But the actual reality of it is beyond conception.
I suppose you could also create a link between that and, let's say, the tendency within Islamic theology to say that God has this attribute that we understand to be something that a human might have, but it is unlike anything we can imagine. So, as in they infer that God has attributes that we would describe for a human, but they cannot be imagined in the same
the application
way.
is beyond. So
that would suggest there again is a deeper meaning
to
a very surface level
statement.
Description.
But it points to this concept, which is if divinity itself is incomprehensible to humanity in its fullness, then the words that we use to describe this are inadequate. They effectively kind of act as like signs that point to something that cannot be talked about or cannot be expressed.
I think in some respects, or in some instances, I think the attempt to superimpose human-like attributes to the divine almost does the divine a disservice on some level.
I agree.
Once you've gone beyond the point of providing language with which to engage with an idea, I think it's quite important that once that engagement has begun, it's made clear that the language that was being used was purely a preliminary interface.
Yeah.
And it's important. I think it's incumbent on anyone who is trying to engage with these ideas to move beyond the surface level understanding.
Yeah, because for example, if you describe a galaxy, you're going to use words like immense, vastness. Because the amount of things that are contained within that galaxy, the trillions of stars, this vast energy that's all encompassing within. You're going to use words that aren't humanistic.
Sure.
But it's something that goes beyond our conception, yet it's not God. Yet when we have described God historically, it's always been in human terms. Father,
but
goddess,
these are
whatever it is.
analogous terms.
Yeah, analogous terms.
One must approach these with caution before becoming maybe too married to the idea that they do these concepts any real justice.
Yeah. But because if we're thinking about an existence, I think it's a fair statement, an entity or a being of some kind that has no individualization, no sense of individual personality. It's just something that exists, that produces things naturally. And when I say naturally, it isn't something that happens via agency, rather it is just a byproduct of its existence. The entity produces universes.
As in its definition, in a way.
It's just what it is. There's no thinking. It just is a natural. It's like light coming from the sun. The sun produces light naturally. The sun produces heat naturally. It doesn't think.
It's not packaging it and sending it to you.
It's not choosing. It's not deciding.
It's just what it does.
It's just the light is emanating from the sun, and so is the heat, and that's the natural byproduct of its existence. When you think of divinity in this sense, it changes the concept of what it is, and it moves from being a consciously acting agent that's thinking, feeling, to the definition of its existence is just to produce. And that is a possible conception of God, which goes against the more anthropomorphized man in the sky, man in the heavens, swinging thunderbolts or whatever it is. It transcends beyond personality and moves into the realm of just what I would say dimensions that just transcend our knowledge. But it is interesting to contemplate that. And I like the idea of it naturally produces. It's not thinking. That is what it is. It produces creation. That's just what it does. It produces consciousness. That's what it does.
And we segued into this conversation from a question off camera about what Ahura Mazda is.
Yes,
the deity of Zoroastrianism.
Yep.
And did you ask me, well, correct me if I'm wrong, you said, does Ahura Mazda think? something to that effect.
Does he have consciousness? Does he have conscious awareness? Does it have conscious
And
awareness?
I think I responded with something to the effect of, it is consciousness.
Yeah. Okay.
It is consciousness itself, but in its. See, I don't want to infuse this conversation with too much of my own musing, too many of my own musings. I want to try to be faithful to what I understand to be the message conveyed by Zarathustra, if I'm speaking about Zoroastrianism. And Zarathustra communicated his understanding of what Ahura Mazda is through his hymns, known as the Gathas.
Yeah.
There is an element of anthropomorphization in the sense that in some extracts, Zarathustra describes a potential relationship with Ahura Mazda as being like one with a friend.
Metaphorically,
yeah. I think it's metaphorical because at no point does he attribute any sort of human-like characteristics per se to Ahura Mazda.
It's like saying that a captain of a ship, his best friend is the sea. The sea isn't a person,
right?
But the relationship between the sailor
it's a symbolic
and the sea can be like a man and his friend, because they're together all the time,
right?
So it's interesting.
So the words Ahura and Mazda, Ahura meaning Lord, and being synonymous with the idea. So in ancient theology, like Greek theology, Vedic theology, you have two classes of deity. You have the gods of Olympus, if we're talking about the Greek concept, and then you have the old gods, the Titans. So Zarathustra lived in the milieu of the pre-Hindu Vedic tradition. If that makes sense. So, like the Indo-European society.
Yeah.
So before there was a Hinduism, Hinduism proceeded from the Vedic
pre-Vedic tradition. Okay, cool. Makes sense.
So even if we look into like modern Hinduism, for example, the gods are the devas. The root and the root for this word is the same as the root for deus, for example. And the Titans, so the devas were considered the good deities, so to speak, and their counterparts were the Asuras, who in the Greek tradition would be the Titans, the old gods, and they were considered more likely to be malevolent beings. Zarathustra inverted this idea, and he made the pinnacle of his belief system one of what had traditionally been regarded as one of the Titans or one of the Asuras. And you hear the word Ashura in Ahura. So these are cognate words, sister words. So Mazda is the Avestan word for wisdom. So Ahura Mazda is Lord Wisdom, sometimes inferred to be Lord of Wisdom. But I consider it wisdom itself as being Lord of creation, if we put it that way.
So rather than it being an entity that possesses wisdom, it is wisdom itself.
That's my... I tend to see it that way.
But this has a metaphysical existence of some kind.
Well, we go back to what existence
meaning
is.
It isn't made of particles.
No.
So it's metaphysical means it just means beyond physical.
Metaphysical existence.
It has an existence beyond the physical realm.
As in
material realm. Excuse me.
So it clearly has a conceptual aspect. Okay, now I'm wording it that way
which is fine.
to avoid saying that it that it is exclusively conceptual, but it has a conceptual aspect.
Okay.
Whether or not that's all it has, I don't know. And that conceptual aspect is an archetype. It is archetypical for good. It is the definition of good in the cosmology of Zoroastrianism.
Would that goodness encapsulate the totality of existence? Such as, for example, planets orbiting another planet fulfills that goodness. Human beings operating with the right mindset fulfills that goodness. When things are functioning as they're supposed to, they operate according to that ideal. Or?
The ideal that humans fulfill when they live in line with goodness has a different name. But they are invoking the goodness of Ahura Mazda to achieve it.
So this is an emanation, you said before.
So
the goodness is an emanation of Ahura Mazda.
No, the goodness is embodied by an emanation. So there is an emanation of Ahura Mazda that embodies the ideal state of reality.
Okay, yeah.
The highest potential form of reality. Okay, and it is embodied by an archetype emanated by Ahura Mazda. So you have Ahura Mazda, and from him are 7 emanations, each of which represents the archetype of a concept.
Yeah, okay.
One of those emanations is called Asha Vahishta, which means best order or best truth. Asha being synonymous with truth, order, virtue, and Vahishta, which is actually a cognate of the word best. Vahishta, so in this linguistic tradition, the Avestan linguistic tradition, the V can be transliterated with a B. So in modern Persian, the cognate or the descendant of the word Vahishta is Behesht. Now you can hear the word best in Behesht.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And Behesht is a word that's synonymous with heaven, with heavenly existence. So Asha Vahishta is the archetype for the ideal, the most ideal potential for reality, which can be achieved with the agency of man who actively embodies the principles of good, which are Ahura Mazda.
How does an individual human being connect with this wisdom? It doesn't mean the wisdom is a being, but how does an individual who is seeking to align themselves with the principles of Ahura Mazda and what that represents, how does an individual move into alignment with that, according to your understanding? What is the process?
According to my understanding, humanity would, again, invoke one of these emanations. In this particular case, to answer this specific question that you're asking, as in how does one interface with wisdom, as in the ultimate wisdom, Ahura Mazda, is through what is called the good mind, or in the Avestan language, Vohu Mana. Vohu means good, Mana is a cognate of the word mind, and in some other instances it will be Menu or Minu, but in this, the most common pronunciation is Vohu Mana. Vohu Mana, the good mind, is, and I think I used this analogy before, and I'm hesitant to use analogies for fear that they become the basis for anthropomorphization.
Yeah, no, but we've moved beyond that because we agree, just for in principle, it is not an entity, it's not a man.
It's just a means by which to interface with an idea.
That's it, that's all it is. And the emanations support that.
So, if you consider the ultimate wisdom to be the water contained by a well.
Okay, wow, yeah.
And your mind to be the bucket that collects this wisdom, this water. Vohumena is the rope with which you lower the bucket into the water and collect wisdom.
Okay. So the rope is necessary, obviously, to do so.
One can, again, according to Zarathustra, one can only walk as a friend of Ahura Mazda by engaging with the good mind, Bahumana. So there's an argument as to which of the emanations is the primary interface. So there's some thought that there is another emanation by the name of Spenta Minu. Spenta Minu is the bounteous or the creative, and Minu is the mind. So the bounteous mind, the creative mind, or the progressive mind. But I think to answer your specific question, Vahumana is the primary means by which to engage with the ultimate wisdom of Ahura Mazda.
Another thing that we need to be mindful of is when we think of what consciousness is, even our concept of consciousness is humanized, because we only know what it means to be a human being with an individualized sense of personality.
Right.
And then we attribute the concept of consciousness itself with that. So we say for something to be conscious, it must have a sense of human perception of itself. I am a being. I have, I'm aware of my shape and form. I know I can differentiate between myself. That is a human concept in itself. So when you're trying to consider what a divine consciousness could be, it doesn't have anything to do with humanity. No. It has nothing to do with I or me or differentiation.
It's not a perspective that we can acquire.
Yeah, there's no need for saying I. It just is. I think that's a good way of saying it. It exists.
With the best will in the world, if I attempted to think like a dog for a moment, put myself in the perspective of a dog, all I will be doing is using the mind of a human being, using the thought process of a human being, and telling myself, how would a dog think?
Yeah, because
well, it would only be through my human faculties that I could engage with that.
Even the concept of thinking is unnecessary for a deity, because thinking is a human activity. So when you think about the concept of an existence that transcends materiality, like I said before, the space that exists between me and you is real, but it isn't conscious. The actual the fabric of space that separates me and you right now, the particles that's been separated, exist, but it has no conscious awareness, like a human. But it has some kind of existence. So
I think that's an interesting philosophical point, because we could argue that space is conscious in the sense that you occupy space. Therefore, the bit of space that you occupy is by definition conscious.
Yeah, exactly. That little part.
But the bit you mean in between us.
Between us.
Right.
It has a different kind of consciousness that is suited to its existence. But that doesn't necessitate thinking, feeling, self-awareness. It just is. It is what it is. And I think that's an interesting point, because we have a tendency to attribute or humanize deity, even when we think about the concept of it being aware. That we think, why does it need to be aware? Why does it have to have a self-awareness? No, because that's the maximally perfect entity. This is the kind of argumentation we usually use. Yeah, because if God isn't aware, then I'm great. It's no. If for something to transcend human, to be more than human, put it that way, it exists beyond the human definition. It does not have to be recognizable in any way, shape, or form to a human. Even if it doesn't have a body, it doesn't even need to be conscious. It just is a different kind of existence. So I think energy is a good word.
But this is why
I'm not saying I believe that, but I think this is an interesting thing to think about.
But I often resist the idea even of trying to define what God is. Because, and I sometimes kind of despair when I see theists of various denominations describing God, but then always adding the caveat that it's not like anything we can imagine. It has an attribute, but this attribute, despite how you understand that word, is actually
something else,
completely different.
Then it's not accurate.
I think, why are we even
There's no point.
Why are we engaging with this subject matter? Let's just agree that the thing can't be described, and let's just get on with, with the everyday.
So I am in the camp that the thing can be described, and words do have meaning, and words are relevant, because if not, then the words themselves would have no value. It's like me saying, what does the dog look like? I use the word dog. What does the dog look like? This is just like a low-level example. And then I say the dog is red, blue, green, and yellow. You've never seen any of those colors before. You've never even seen what a dog looks like. My words it becomes nonsensical. To describe something and then say the words we're using have no one-to-one or even accurate definition, it's just nonsense. So I am in the camp that the words have value, and I obviously believe in divine revelation, but I think if we just put this aside for a second, my personal beliefs, and just speak philosophically about trying to describe accurately something that transcends human existence and even human concepts, we end up in a difficult predicament. But what I do think we can do is we can have an apprehension of something that transcends us. I can look into the universe and say, wow, I don't even begin to understand how massive the universe is, but I can conceive of a small component of it and have an awareness of its existence. Like we're saying, it's not a being, it doesn't feel, it doesn't think, it doesn't need to think. It has no recognizable analogy to a human in any way, shape, or form. It is wisdom itself. It is an existence that serves a function in reality, but it isn't nature. It's beyond that. If that makes sense?
It does make sense. What you say about your belief in divine revelation.
Yep.
So how I consider that in the view of Zarathustra's teachings, when I read them, I don't see Ahura Mazda implanting words.
It doesn't have to.
No. I understand that you understand that it doesn't have to, but I'm saying just to kind of build the picture.
I love it.
Because as per...
No, it's fine. It's a cute dog. It's good. Yeah.
In line with this understanding of Vahumana, the rope that allows us to reach this wisdom, that in itself,
is divine revelation.
The enlightenment that provides
is divine revelation.
Is the divine revelation.
But but the difference is it is proactive, meaning you have to reach out to the
that is
the
at
ocean.
The core of Zarathustra's teachings.
You have to do it. It isn't coming to you. It's not sending messengers.
That is at the heart of Zarathustra's teachings.
It's not sending messengers. It's not sending prophets.
There are no transmissions.
It is you reaching a state of, if you know what I mean, saying meditative awareness, where you can
you must clear the path. To gain access.
But it's always flowing.
It's there.
It's always flowing.
It's there to be accessed.
Exactly. It didn't begin flowing when you were born. It's always been flowing.
Yeah.
But you have to tap into it. That's interesting.
So
very interesting.
And I say this is core to Zarathustra's teachings because, and I've talked about this before, the three main principles that Zoroastrianism gets boiled down to.
That is still divine revelation. I would classify that absolutely.
Okay. Good. Then I feel
I
won't feel so awkward.
It is divine revelation.
Describing, because there's always a tendency to, especially in the Western world, or I guess anywhere where the Abrahamic tradition
strong,
has foundation. When you use certain terms, certain inferences are made.
Of course.
It's an assumption that the type of when you use the word like divine revelation, that it means the same thing as it does for the Abrahamic tradition.
It just means the source does not come from your mind.
Right.
It comes from a body of knowledge that transcends humanity.
Right.
But to tap into that, you must actively use good mind, which is what you said before.
Yes.
But that would still classify as divine revelation because the source is from the divine. But the divine didn't choose you as an individual prophet to the nations to go and send a message. Mm-hmm. It's you actively doing the
work. I don't
work.
Want to speak on behalf of
I'm throwing out there. It's you actively doing the work to try to tap into that wisdom and then translate that into something that people can understand.
And the reason why I say it's foundational, the three principles that are professed when one boils down what Zoroastrianism is, or what it must embody in a person, is good thought, good words, and good deeds. And it is that good thought that creates the path to the reservoir, the infinite reservoir of wisdom.
That's a good way of approaching it. Yeah.
And I've described this in other videos. There are no good thought, good words, and good deeds. But there are no good words or good deeds. Hold on. Stop. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. But listen, don't do something you're going to regret, man.
I'm not going to touch him.
Don't do something. Don't something you're going to regret.
Breaking the law, mate.
It's debate, man. It's a debate. You know what I mean?
No!
Oh, leave him.
What did he say? What was it about?
We'll be back. We'll be
I
back.
just don't want this guy to do something
Huh?
he's going to regret.
I have no idea. Do you know, what is your position? Because we're trying to understand. Are you Christian? Are you Muslim?
I'm a follower of the Messiah.
Jesus.
Primarily, yes, man.
Yes, you are. Jesus. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
Yeshua, man.
Cool,
Yes.
cool, cool.
You don't believe what Jesus said.
Yeah, dude.
But you crossed the line.
I don't cross any line. It's a fact. It's a fact.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, right. Oh my goodness. Now that was an unusual day.
I like London.
I have no idea what happened. No idea what happened there.
Another day in paradise.
No problem. What was the last thing we were saying? The rope.
Good thoughts
It
good
would
words.
still classify as divine revelation, yes.
and good deeds.
Yeah. Just with no agency involved. Yeah.
And so good thought is, like I said, is the clearing the path for interface with this infinite reservoir of wisdom. However, to give good words and good deeds any value whatsoever, they must be preceded by good thought. As in, there is no good deed that is not preceded by good thought.
I agree.
Otherwise, this is an accident.
Yep.
The value in a good deed is in the intention. So good thought and the good mind, the engagement of the good mind, is the basis for all righteousness in Zoroastrian philosophy, as far as I'm aware.
Fair enough. No, that's interesting. That has cleared a lot of questions I had about kind of like the process of kind of interacting with the divine, and because again, as you said before, there is the concept of the being, or like, humanoid figure in the heavens who has kind of like a governmental agency. What would your explanation be as to why there are so many individualized entities in our universe or world? Let me say world, because I don't know.
In our world
in our
view.
world, yeah. No, in our actual world, like.
What do you mean?
Meaning that human beings have consciousness and we have the capacity to think about all of these things. These are just byproducts of Ahura Mazda just doing what it is. Like, the origin of life.
Right. I got you.
What's your?
So again, my understanding about Zoroastrian cosmology is that reality, the universe, was made was created through the imaginative process of within Ahura Mazda's mind. So
there is a mind.
Mind, not a brain. So I'm saying I'm giving you what I understand to be the cosmology. I
Okay.
can't profess that this is in the words of Zarathustra himself, but as in the Zoroastrian concept
Okay.
that reality was created in the mind of Ahura Mazda, and that it was created entirely good, and that over time it became corrupted, which explains the existence of evil in our reality. Sorry, what was the
Yeah, just what was the origin of, kind of consciousness? And those,
as in it was a process of a process of thought on the part of Ahura Mazda, which is responsible for creating our reality. Our reality was a thought in the mind of the ultimate consciousness, the ultimate wisdom.
So there is thinking. There's no problem with that. There is no problem with that. I'm just saying. So there is thinking. There is something that can be analogously described as thinking, even though it doesn't reflect what we do.
It could be the case that this is simply the word which most appropriately embodies the process.
Okay. Okay, that's a good answer.
So
very good
our
answer.
reality was envisaged in the mind of Ahura Mazda, and therefore, and in that process became real.
Yep.
A separate reality from the spiritual reality.
Exactly.
So in Zoroastrianism, there are two realities. There is the material and there is the spiritual.
Yep.
And then in the course of time, where there was the absence of the mindfulness of good or the mindfulness of God, Ahura Mazda, evil emerged, was allowed to corrupt the otherwise entirely good creation.
Okay.
So, in contradiction to the Abrahamic tradition, where God is also responsible for the creation of light and darkness, for good and evil.
Yeah.
In the Zoroastrian concept, evil is an emergent state, and it's actually literally translated. It is a state of mind. The devil figure of Zoroastrianism is Angara Mainyu. Angara, you might hear the word anger or angry, and actually in modern Iranian languages, the gera part is actually to be knotted or to be constrained. Mainyu is the mind, so it's the constrained or constraining mind, or the knotted mind. The antithesis of the bounteous, creative, progressive mind.
Would you be fair to say that these are states of consciousness? These are different states.
That's my understanding, and they're it's kind of built into the name. So Angara Mainyu is the constrained mind. It's the constrained mentality.
It's literally a state of consciousness.
Yes.
It's a way of thinking.
Yes. So what it says to me is that those who propagate a constrained way of thinking are the agents of evil in this religious tradition or this philosophical tradition.
Yeah, okay.
And so for each of the emanations of Ahura Mazda, there is an antithetical concept also. So as I said, for the bounteous or creative or progressive mind, there is the constrained mentality. And obviously where there is the best mind or the best thinking or the best mentality, there is the worst, and so on.
And when you achieve that kind of state of consciousness, it enables you to again tap into that reservoir or that kind of ocean of knowledge, which helps you to make whatever decision is best in that moment.
Yes.
It's interesting. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that.
Yeah, I feel like all these dramas going on around.
Yeah, it kind of like
taking steam out of our
content.
It's
like it shook me a little bit. Oh, but it's cool. I think we can finish there for now. We can do another one another
I think
time.
that's a nice capsule of.
Because I feel like we really achieved a lot of like ground there. Because now I have a better a far better conception. Like obviously we spoke before, but I even like the way you described it, because before you weren't so forthcoming with that analogy, which was useful, but now you've kind of presented it in a way it's like okay, that can still be considered divine revelation, of course, because you get it from the divine source. The knowledge didn't come from man; it came from Lord wisdom in this context.
And
that would still be
into
divine. That would be divine revelation, absolutely.
You off?
Yeah, breaking fast.
Take it easy.
Take care.